Listen to a very strange tale. As Solon, the wisest of the seven, once told it. Atlantis. A mysterious and magnificent civilization. According to Solon, it was no mere fable, but something that truly existed 9,000 years ago. It was greater than Libya and Asia combined. And within it had arisen a line of kings who ruled over the land. But after a violent earthquake and an extraordinary flood in a single dreadful day and night, the island of Atlantis vanished, sinking into the sea. And what if Solon's story was true? Could there really have been an advanced civilization destroyed by a cataclysm? I thought it was only a myth, yet the idea took root in my mind and grew. My spirit thirsted for truth. Wonder urged me on. I set out for Egypt to hear what no one in Athens seemed to know. Perhaps, I thought, I might even discover something more. Then I heard accounts that defied all logic. The priests spoke of a nearly perfect city, and of the Atlanteans' remarkable knowledge. They also spoke of an ancient age they called the First Time, of distant gods from faraway lands, teachers who had taught the Egyptians everything they knew. And what if those ancient gods were Atlantean survivors of that great disaster? How many truths about Atlantis have been lost forever? Who were these Atlanteans, and where did they come from? Was it true they possessed such immense wealth and wisdom? I am Plato, son of Ariston and Perictione. I have come to tell you what I have learned about Atlantis, what this extraordinary civilization was like, and the unexpected things I discovered. I do not claim to offer absolute truths. I only wish to make you think. As my teacher Socrates once said, true wisdom lies in knowing that you know nothing. One. The origin of Atlantis. What forgets its roots will soon fall. According to the Egyptian priests, about 9,000 years ago, beyond the pillars of Heracles, there existed a powerful and fertile island, well positioned for maritime trade. That island, rich in resources and surrounded by navigable routes, was home to a civilization of Egyptians called Atlantis. They said its people, the Atlanteans, worshipped the sea god Poseidon and credited him with the creation of their culture. But I did not take that as a literal statement. It is more likely that in speaking of the god, they referred to an ancestral lineage of seafarers who emerged from somewhere in the Mediterranean and took root on that distant island. a woman, according to myth, marked the beginning. Her name was Cleto, remembered for her wisdom, leadership, and ability to preserve peace among tribes. Her son, Atlas, was the first to unite all the inhabitants under a single government. As generations passed, the Atlanteans began to build what would become the capital of their civilization, the city of Atlantis. They chose to raise it on a plain near the sea and designed its layout in concentric rings, alternating land and navigable canals. The island was rich in natural resources. Its fertile soil was nourished by a network of smaller channels that carried water from the mountains to the cultivated fields. They possessed hardwoods, fine stone, and a reddish alloy drawn from the depths of the earth. Orichalcum, likely a blend of copper and other metals. For generations, Atlantis thrived. Its government was stable, its trade prosperous. Harmony between nature, craft, and governance was the key to its success. But later generations, born into comfort, forgot what had built their greatness. Even in Athens, we used to say that good times create weak men. The Egyptians said that from the depths. Poseidon watched as the Atlanteans grew corrupt and began to prepare the punishment he deemed necessary. 2. The geometry of the gods. Perfection does not fear time, until time reminds it that even it can fall. Imagine, my friends, a city made of perfect circles, so precise in its proportions that it seemed impossible for human hands to have drawn it. In the outer ring lived humble workers who cultivated exotic fruits, tended lush vineyards, and guarded the springs that flowed down from distant mountains. Facing the ocean, enormous stone statues stood as eternal sentinels, silently watching over the horizon. Moving toward the heart of Atlantis lay the second ring, where merchants traded in lively marketplaces full of color and sound. At the very center, protected by impenetrable walls and wrapped in mystery and reverence, stood the inner ring, the core of power and the sacred. There rose the grand temple of Poseidon, clad in gleaming gold, flawless ivory, and the dazzling orichalcum, whose radiance seemed almost unreal. In Atlantean mythology, Poseidon was the god of the sea, earthquakes, and horses. Not only their supreme deity, but their founder and divine guardian. At the very heart stood the royal palace. Home to the kings descended from Cleito and Atlas. Every stone was set with impossible precision and care. For generations, Atlantis flourished in perfect harmony, until its descendants abandoned the virtue that had once made them strong. And then I understood clearly that flawless city hid within its foundations an imperceptible crack, a fracture growing quietly in the dark. Three, Orichalcum, the metal of Poseidon. Those who used it with wisdom prospered. Those who used it with pride vanished. They also told me of Orichalcum, a metal that shone like living fire. The Egyptian priests claimed it was a divine gift meant to protect the Atlanteans. This strange metal existed only in Atlantis. As if something supernatural had carefully placed it within the island's depths. Orichalcum adorned every corner. The temple doors, the sharp tips of spears, the bridges spanning the city's circular canals. Beyond its beauty, it possessed a nearly magical quality. When touched, the Atlanteans felt a cosmic connection, a deep spiritual balance. Some priests meditated before great statues made of the metal, claiming to receive visions of the future spoken directly by the gods. Even the kings wore crowns and scepters of Orichalcum. As visible proof of their divine authority. Over time, its sacred meaning was lost. The young began to compete fiercely, raising towering statues, forging jewels, and crafting lavish ornaments from the metal. Then, on a fateful night, a greedy merchant placed a small piece of Orichalcum on a table to buy political favors. That simple, dark act echoed through Atlantis like a silent thunder, devastating though unseen. The elders warned of it, but society was already drunk on arrogance. Yet, this was only the beginning of the tragedy that would sink Atlantis You have not yet heard the most terrible part. Or the Guardians of Knowledge. To reach the truth, one must walk alone. Whoever waits for it to be handed to them will receive chains disguised as wisdom. In my conversations with the Egyptians, I heard tales of the Guardians of Knowledge, Atlanteans who protected secrets powerful enough to unleash total destruction. At the very heart of Atlantis, beneath skies eternally painted deep blue, stood the Great Library. Inside, endless corridors echoed with the whisper of pages revealing forgotten and forbidden truths. There dwelled the Guardians of Knowledge, tireless protectors of Atlantean wisdom, cloaked in dark garments, laced with subtle glimmers of orichalcum. Nearby rose the Celestial Observatory. A wide tower, whose crystal dome opened at night like a flower seeking the infinite. From there, Atlantean astronomers watched the movements of the planets, tracing mysterious paths with astonishing precision. Among the Guardians, 3 circles maintained a balance of knowledge. First came the Curios, capable of answering any question asked by earlier generations. Then came the Noesis, philosophers who debated ethics and destiny, knowing that power without virtue leads inevitably to ruin. Lastly, stood the most revered circle, the Therapontes. Priest scientists capable to channel the hidden energy of orichalcum, healing wounds and curing illness. The teaching of the Guardians was clear. Knowledge is infinite, like the ocean, and to venture into it requires both courage and humility. Under the wise guidance of the Guardians, Atlantis flourished. They created tools to sail unknown seas, predicted eclipses, and turned deserts into gardens. Yet, a silent danger was growing: pride. Young apprentices began to crave the power that knowledge promised. Some thought personal glory and absolute control. Knowledge is fire, whispered the oldest of the Noesis. It can light the path or burn it to ashes. You will soon understand that the old man spoke the truth. The coming of the ashes was inevitable. Five, the Seafaring Kings. Do not follow the king who stands alone. Follow the one who trembles beside you when the storm arrives. The Atlantean kings were not mere sovereigns confined to glittering thrones. They were daring explorers, navigators who led fleets into the unknown. In the golden days, the seafaring kings departed from the majestic Atlantean ports, carved in concentric rings that embraced the ocean. Their ships were marvels of engineering, built from noble woods and reinforced with gleaming bands of orichalcum. Their sails, woven from linen consecrated in ancient rituals, unfurled like immense wings, capable of taming even the wildest winds. Atlantean fleets reached distant exotic shores, lands where primitive peoples worshipped different gods and kindled fires with stones. The Atlanteans did not conquer. They traded with respect, often sharing tools, agricultural techniques, medical knowledge, and methods of navigation. Yet, Atlantean wisdom was far too advanced. Centuries, perhaps millennia, beyond what other cultures could understand. On floating islands, they built observatories to study the stars. In frozen lands, they raised shelters. In dense jungles, they drew secret cures from plants. The seafaring kings were not distant figures. They themselves set foot on foreign soil, made contact, and charted maps with supernatural precision. But over time, the pursuit of knowledge began to decay. Some monarchs replaced the desire to explore with the hunger to possess. Their voyages turned into missions of domination and greed. The ships ceased to carry science and began to bear symbols of power. In the temples of the Egyptian city of Sais, the voice of the last great seafaring king was still remembered. He who does not respect the sea will be carried away by it. Once again, the elders had spoken wisely. The fury of the sea was beginning to awaken. 6. The customs of the Atlanteans. A weary soul cannot dream. Vision is born in the stillness of a body at rest. The Egyptian priests spoke with fascination about the diverse customs of the Atlanteans. On certain summer evenings, as the sun descended, something subtle changed in the city. A solemn calm hovered the streets, as if everyone remembered that to exist was also to rest. Silent groups gathered in circles to activate small crystal spheres filled with a luminous fluid extracted from orichalcum. Families and sages alike shared the same purpose: to understand that true power did not lie in material wealth, but in the ability to live fully in the present. What most amazed the Egyptians was another tradition. Once a year, in honor of Poseidon, the Atlanteans built a golden boat that sailed through the city's canals. It symbolized the god's blessing upon the city. During its ritual voyage, priests recited ancient verses meant to protect Atlantis until the next solar cycle. Finally, I must tell you about what they called the Festival of the Luminous Tides. At every equinox, the Atlanteans gathered on the shore to release delicate bioluminescent sea creatures. Raised especially for the occasion. The waters glowed as if countless stars had fallen into the sea, forming radiant paths visible from the city and fading into the horizon. As you can see, the Atlanteans possessed a rich and captivating culture, but not even this beauty could save them from the pride of their leaders, which led to their downfall. Seven, Visions of the End. The Therapontes were the first to notice it. The glow of the orichalcum had begun to fade, as if the heart of the world were about to shift. One of them, the eldest, finally spoke. The harmony that sustains this city has begun to break. Not by sea, not by earth, but by the hearts of men. Some priests saw visions of statues falling amid columns of fire. Others heard the echo of thousands of drowning voices. The kings listened attentively, yet with unease. The surrounding splendor seemed incompatible with the thought of an ending. How could something so perfect, their beloved Atlantis, be on the verge of collapse? One noble even said, "Every prophecy is born from fear, not from the future." But the priests knew. What they understood was simple and devastating. Atlantis would not be destroyed from without, but from within. The cracks unseen by all lay in their choices, in their excesses, in the arrogance that had slowly become law. One of the poems carved in the hidden chambers of the great temple read, "When the gods fall silent, men begin to believe themselves eternal." The greater the splendor of a civilization, the swifter its fall can be, just as would soon happen to Atlantis. Eight, the arrogance of power. Where the old cling to the throne, the future rots at the door. When power ceases to fear the people, it begins to feed upon them. For generations, Atlantis thrived as an almost perfect creation. A balance between divine will and human virtue. But in time, what had once inspired humility became a source of pride. Greatness, accumulated as inheritance, began to be seen as a right. The Atlanteans started to look upon their temples with arrogance rather than gratitude. Orichalcum, once a symbol of sacred connection, became a mark of vanity. The wise were replaced by the wealthy. Beaches no longer spoke of balance, they repeated hollow words. The Elder Kings, witnesses to the city's growth and prosperity, feared losing everything and clung to power with iron hands. They hoarded treasures without thought for their people, obsessed with preserving their own legacy. They ignored the young, shared no wealth, offered no wisdom. The new generations, eager to bring ideas and purpose, were entirely dismissed. Power no longer bled. The kings waged wars from the safety of their thrones, while the people paid in flesh, in blood, and in mourning. In the streets, a quiet certainty began to grow. Without revolution, there would be no justice. More subtly, the voices of the wise were silenced. The warnings of the guardians of knowledge were dismissed as defeatism. Doubt itself was branded as treason. The sages understood, when a civilization believes itself eternal, and the elders alone hold its fate, collapse is near, and tomorrow is already lost. One of the Noesis wrote in secret, "Power, blind to its limits, imagines itself eternal. But that illusion condemns it from within." Fate was already sealed. Now, I will tell you what the Egyptians remembered about the final days of Atlantis. 9. The first tremors. What seems sudden has been denied many times before it arrives. The first signs were neither violent nor alarming. One morning, the water in the canals began to flow backward, as if the sea itself were breathing inward. Then came the tremors. Birds took flight in sudden flocks. But there was no fear. Atlantis had lived in splendor for so long that change seemed impossible. There was no collective memory of tragedy. Some said, "The earth breathes with us, not against us." Others mocked, "If a god wished to destroy us, he would not have made us eternal." In the temples, orichalcum began to flake away in silence, as though the earth itself were mourning its weight. The wise understood instantly, but kept quiet. Sea creatures started to vanish. Turtles no longer returned to their ponds. Dolphins drifted away from the harbors. The ocean grew opaque and mute. Still, the city celebrated new treaties, new statues, new births. No one wished to speak of what didn't fit the perfect image. One of the curios wrote in his trembling hand, "The stone breaks where no one looks, and what is not seen multiplies." The first tidal wave was gentle. The water receded as though the sea had drawn in a deep breath. Many descended to the exposed sand, collecting shells and gleaming stones. When the water returned, it did so with resolve, but not yet with full fury. That was a clear sign, but no one wished to see it as one. Would history have changed if the Atlanteans had acted? Only one thing was certain. They did nothing. And what came next would be infinitely more terrible. The prophecy carved in stone. Not every rune is made of stone. Some are alive, waiting to be understood. At a forgotten edge of Atlantis' inner ring stood a temple few remembered. Some called it the House of Silence. The elders whispered that its doors only opened when the world needed to remember what should never have been forgotten. The temple was not built of white marble or gleaming orichalcum. Its stone was dark and coarse, covered in lichen and cracks with ancient scars. It had no guardians, no incense, no songs. Only a half-closed door. warped by time and a narrow corridor descending in a spiral toward the Earth. The Guardians of Knowledge descended one night, their oil lamps flickering, hearts uneasy. The air below was heavy, as if it murmured forgotten names. At the center of the crypt rose a smooth wall, a single slab carved with a language long dead. They were not words. They were symbols. It took them weeks to decipher, and when they did, there was no celebration, only silence. If you forgot the hand that gave you the ocean, that same ocean will come to claim its due. One of the Noesis, the youngest, suggested making the inscription public. Another, much older, refused calmly. This is not a warning. It is a final sentence. "11. The day the sky wept fire. The sun rose that day with a strange glow, as if its light hesitated upon touching the temples. The birds did not sing. The sea lay still, holding its breath. The wise did not look to the sky, but to the ground, for they knew that everything about to break first tightens. By mid-morning, an imperceptible vibration ran through the earth, barely a whisper beneath their feet. In the chamber of Poseidon's temple, a crack appeared in the sacred marble. Then came the sound. First dull like the world itself lamenting, then sharp as if a beast trapped for millennia began tearing through its stone prison. And then the sky opened with fire. From the sacred mountain the Atlanteans called Omphalos, the navel of the world, erupted a roar of flames and molten rock. Omphalos, a river of molten fire, shot upward like a spear of wrath toward the clouds, wrapping the heavens in a whirlwind of ash. Day turned to night in an instant. Birds fled. Men screamed. The temples shook. And the fire fell, as judgments do. A burning storm swept over Atlantis, beginning its destruction. In the great palace where the elder kings still debated new alliances and orichalcum coins, the dome opened like a black flower. The fire descended upon them as if it knew their names. There was no time for speeches or shouts of command. Hundreds of young people, the ones who still dreamed instead of obeying, ran toward the docks. Days before, they had felt something fracture. They understood they could no longer trust the promises of the kings. Free thought seeks no permission. It moves forward while others await orders. They were ready. The ships, built of sacred woods and linen sails, waited. They did not flee with joy, but with tears. They knew they were escaping death, but also everything that had been their lives. They left behind their homes, their families, their temples, their civilization. Yet they saved something far more valuable than stone or orichalcum: memory and knowledge. From the ocean, they looked back one last time. The sky still wept tears of fire, while Atlantis awaited silently the final beat of its destiny. The wave that brought forgetting. The next day, the sea withdrew urgently, revealing sands that had not seen the light in centuries. From the horizon, a dark and terrifying shadow began to rise, like a giant awakening from a deep slumber. At first, it was barely a silhouette in the distance, ignored by those in the plazas and streets trying to salvage their treasures. But it was neither cloud nor mountain. It was the sea itself, transformed into a colossal liquid wall, as high and relentless as the arrogance of the Atlantean kings. It moved in silence, its grandeur needing no roar. A faceless beast, yet one with memory. It came to claim what had not been returned. Now it raged with contained fury, fueled by centuries of waiting. A faceless creature, thirsting for vengeance, approached to seize what was its own. The Temple of Poseidon stood defiantly, though weakened by fire and ash. Its blackened columns trembled before the inevitable disaster. When the wave struck the city's outer walls, there was no mercy. The first houses exploded under the relentless weight of water, pulverized instantly. The ancient statues, which had withstood storms and erosions for centuries, were violently uprooted and hurled like projectiles against palaces and temples. A statue of Poseidon remained defiant, the last guardian standing, its jeweled eyes watching the cataclysm with unwavering gaze. Houses, palaces, and temples vanished beneath the turbulent sea, devoured voraciously by the depths. Into the ocean's abyss fell the orichalcum, like a heavy, silent rain. The jewels had no value anymore. The rest of the island was consumed by the ocean's fury, as if the earth itself, offended by such arrogance, sought to erase every trace of that civilization. 13. A New Hope. He who teaches while seeking shelter is no guest. He is a seed. When Atlantis shattered like a sacred vessel, not all was lost to the abyss. Amid fire, darkness, and foam, there were those who chose not to look back. Young people, hearts broken but eyes steady, took the last ship and followed the stars as their only map. They carried no gold, no prophecies, but something far more precious: memory, skills, and knowledge. They did not know where they were headed. They only knew they had to go, for when one world dies, the next begins to grow in the hearts that refuse to surrender. Necessity is the mother of transformation, for only when all paths close does the true one open. Over the passing suns, the vessels scattered like seeds carried by the same wind, spreading toward different horizons. Each group would find a new land. Each land would offer a trial. After long weeks at sea, one ship crossed the entire Mediterranean, circled Kypros, and finally ran aground on a rocky plateau. Soon they began to raise stone circles, not as walls but as cosmic clocks. They did not build to dominate, but to remember. Each stone they placed echoed what had been, a prayer cast to the sky. The locals, still in the first steps of language and fire, approached cautiously. But soon, hearing the rhythm of hammers, they sat to watch, and then to imitate. Thus, understanding was born. Thus, the first alliance was woven. Another Atlantean group landed in Melite, where agriculture was simple and the people harmless. Gradually, they joined the native population, sharing their wisdom. Over decades, new generations erected magnificent temples. According to the Egyptian priests, another group, having become lost in the Mediterranean, sailed south of Kypros until reaching the Egyptian coasts. This was a land of lush savanna and abundant lakes. The Nile was wide, forming canals and marshes. A young woman, Nylia, daughter of one of the fallen Atlantean kings, saw a lion at the edge of an oasis. The animal looked at her without fear, as if recognizing something ancient within her. Then she understood. This land accepted them. As an offering, she suggested carving her gratitude in stone, immortalizing the guardian of the desert. At first, the locals watched from a distance. Their languages were different, their customs foreign. The young woman who had dreamed of the lion shared hardy seeds, taught how to read the stars, and how to know when a shadow on the rock foretells a storm. Seeing the land yield orderly and abundant crops, the elders began to approach. The exchange was simple: knowledge for protection, wealth for peace. The Atlanteans did not impose. They taught, and without realizing it, they also learned. Their language faded, blending with others. Their laws softened. Through generations, the people merged into one. Atlantis was lost to stories, but preserved in stone. Extraordinary constructions arose, aligned with the stars, facing the horizon as if waiting for the return of someone who never came. In time, kings would emerge, claiming descent from those first gods who arrived from another world. 14. The last day of eternity. For generations, Egyptian priests have told this story in whispers. Atlantis existed, powerful and prosperous, a land of abundance. But its inhabitants forgot humility and justice. They began to desire more than they needed, and in their pride, they ignored the laws of gods and men, when arrogance grew beyond measure. Flames and tides swept through that civilization, erasing it from the world. What caused its destruction? The righteous hand of the gods, or unstoppable natural forces. I cannot be certain, yet my intuition tells me another truth. It was blinding pride, ruthless ambition, uncontrolled power. For those who believe themselves invincible, fail to see the storm approaching. This tragedy reminds us that power without virtue is fragile, and that all greatness, if it forgets moderation, is doomed to vanish. From Athens, gazing upon this city I love so dearly, I cannot help but wonder, are we treading the same path? How many future cultures will fall into the same tragedy for failing to remember what happened to Atlantis? Hear my counsel, men of Athens. Always remember that no greatness is eternal if it loses sight of wisdom and moderation. History does not repeat its tragedies. Men repeat their mistakes. That is why the future belongs only to those who can remember. Let this tale serve as a guide, for no people are condemned as long as they listen carefully to the lessons their history offers.